Science Alliance is a network of healthcare and life sciences sector LGBTQ plus networks. And we work together to raise the bar on LGBTQ plus inclusion within our organizations in the sector as a whole. And we do this by sharing good practice and also collectively sponsoring programming just like this, designed so that we can achieve more together than we would individually. And we're super excited to have kind of our inaugural partnership event with InterEngineering. And with that, I'm going to hand over to John, who's going to basically MC today.
Oh, thank you. So that's going to be very grand for what I'm going to do because we've got some wonderful speakers and they're going to speak for us. My name's John Bradbury. My pronouns are he, him. And I'm one of the directors of InterEngineering. And also my day job, a sustainability consultant at a consultancy based in Bristol called Eunomia. Today, obviously, we're joined with the Proud Science Alliance, and we're very excited for that because I've been wanting to do something for a really long time because the medical and pharma sector is a really interesting place. And I think over the last 2 years, especially, I think we've all realized what great work that they do and how quickly they can evolve and adapt to the situations. And with that, we've got two wonderful speakers today. We've got Shruok El-Attar and Martin Wheeler. Both are going to share their experiences of the pharma and medical sectors and obviously their career lifetimes as well. So it's going to be fantastic. A little bit about InterEngineering. Our mission is to connect, inform, and empower LGBTQ engineers and their supporters to foster greater inclusion within the engineering sector. Apologies for my hair. I got it tied back, so it's going everywhere. Since 2014, we have over 1,000 members across the UK and parts of the world, all around the world now as well. And we're leading the charge in terms of the improving the engineering sector through combating things like homophobia, biphobia, transphobia in the workplace, on site, and in the education sector. We host panel discussions like this, site tours, informal events, which enable people to connect together and work together on this really, really important topic. We have a bit of a new mission that we've launched last year after a summit where we got a whole bunch of LGBTQ engineers together in a room. Please check out our website and you can read more about it. And I'll pop the link in the chat function. But now I'm going to hand over to what you're all here to listen to, which is Shruok and Martin. Shruok wants to show the world through a diversity of what engineers look like. And that's by being a belly dancer as well, a kick-ass engineer, and has been listed for the BBC 100 Most Influential Women in the World in 2018, United Nations Refugee Agency Young Woman of the Year in 2018, and to top that, the IET top young women engineers in the UK in 2019 and 20. Then we also have the wonderful Martin Wheeler. Martin is the former Vice President of Engineering at GSK with an extensive experience in the pharmaceutical sector globally. Martin will delve into his background into designing pharma products of today, which has made a difference to all of our lives, and his experience of coming out in the workplace. So today we're going to hear for both speakers one at a time, and then we're going to open it up to everyone for questions. But please feel free, if you've got questions along the way, just pop them in the chat. We'll also be launching some polls throughout the event as well, so we'll get to see the feedback on them. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to our first speaker, the wonderful Martin.
Hello there, everybody. So I'm going to touch on two things, really. A little bit about the industry, which I left to 2019, but I think things are pretty similar. And I'm going to talk a lot about my career and career progression with 40 years in the industry. And also being a gay man as well, and how that affected me one way and the other. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about my sort of background. So I did chemical engineering, and I left that and did 6 years with a process engineering company that specialized in the food and pharmaceutical brewing industries. So sort of clean engineering, really sanitary engineering. And like many engineers, starting off in a sort of design function before sort of moving on. And after about 6 years, I sort of got, actually I got made redundant. The company was going through bad times, and it was a great opportunity. And at the time, the job market was very buoyant, and I ended up with a job with Beecham, which is part of the GSK heritage companies. So I then spent the next 31 years with GSK. So again, a very traditional career path, which maybe is less likely to happen these days, but spending your whole career really with one major company. And I ended up as the VP of engineering for the pharma sector, focusing on the new product introduction and global supply sites. I retired in the end of 2019, and then I did a 9-month stint on the government's vaccines task force, working on the manufacturing work stream. So I did that, and then so that really is my working career. So I'm going to touch on a little bit about what my thoughts on where the pharmaceutical industry is going and how that affects the facilities and the equipment and that's obviously what the engineers design, procure, install, and to get working. So what I see really is that in the secondary field where you're producing the finished products, the technologies haven't really changed for many decades. And although we were flirting with continuous granulation and production and things, it's really still around the conventional batch processes, but you're moving to smaller runs of many different types of products. So rather than large runs, you're looking at much smaller, much more specialty, small molecule products. This is obviously in companies like GSK, big pharma, where you're producing innovative and new drugs, as opposed to maybe mass producing paracetamol or something like that. So what you find in the industry, there's overcapacity of conventional large scale secondary facilities. And so a lot of my career was spent in closing factories down, extending factories to move products around. And what you also saw is a move to higher containment. So you need higher containment on the equipment because you have higher potency. So that is the sort of move in that part of the industry. The other part in what we call primary, or the API, active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturing, which is fine chemistry if you want. Again, a move to outsourcing a lot of that. There's a huge industry in India and the Far East. So what you saw is companies like GSK reducing the number of their API facilities and really only focusing on products where they have the intellectual property, and many of the bulk ingredients, buying those in, obviously lower cost production from moving outside of, say, Europe or the US. So that's a typical trend. The other trend is the move to biopharmaceuticals. So traditionally, it was small molecules, so the chemical route of production. So moving to biopharmaceuticals. So really, the companies having the wrong type of facilities. So where they are investing in new factories, it's in the primary production and then the secondary. And in the primary, it was dominated by fixed stainless steel hard piped fermenter systems. And the problem with that is that they're quite bespoke to each molecule. So you have to build them, multi-million-pound projects. Then you have to do your clinical trials on that facility. Then you wait, and then if it doesn't get approved, then the facility, you're always remodeling and stripping out the facilities you built because the molecule didn't make it. So the move now is to these disposable fermenter type systems where it's all in a sort of as a disposable bag in a way, if you want. So you do your fermentation in that, and then and so for smaller quantities, and that's the move. And certainly when I was in the vaccines task force, all the vaccines that we have heard about were produced on that type of process, using sort of disposable fermentation. The other thing on the secondary side is the filling, which has the aseptic filling for these biopharmaceuticals, moving to isolator technology. So again, many of the secondary sterile facilities were out of date and were getting non-compliant because you can't do terminal sterilization with these products. And so you need to aseptically fill, and that means isolators. And again, maybe move to like pre-sterilized syringes and vials, as opposed to sterilizing washing and washing tunnels on the site itself. So that's a quick whiz round where I see the sort of technology going in the pharmaceutical industry. So I'm going to move now to talk about how I fitted into that. And so this is a more personal part of the talk, which is about my career and how that developed. So let's just assume, for the purpose of the discussion, my career was successful. And therefore, if we work on that premise, then the rest follows from there. I think and people do ask me for advice for careers, and I think I've tried to summarize here my thoughts on this. And I think, first of all, you have to love what you do, because if you otherwise it becomes hard work. I think if you really enjoy your work, if you love your work, and then it doesn't become a chore. So the work you put in, you're not you're not sort of regretting having to work late one evening. It just flows naturally and you adjust. I think you have to work out as an engineer where your heart lies. Most engineers start off in design and then you sort of move up. It's almost like a Y model. You either move up the engineering leadership route, maybe through project management and then managing groups of engineers, which is where I ended up. 14, 16 global supply sites, about 3,500 engineers, making sure the facilities are maintained properly, extended, the money spent. So, or you become a deep technical specialist, a tableting specialist or whatever. So I think you have to sort of decide where your heart lies and pick the route. The other thing I would say is, if you're going to remain an engineer in a pharmaceutical company, now may be different in engineering companies where that is the raison d'etre of the company, but for a pharmaceutical company, it's a support function. So there are many, many opportunities in a big global organization. So if you were going to sort of stay in engineering and get to the sort of the top of that organization, I think you have to be really quite good, because there's a lot of competition, because there aren't many senior roles, but there are lots of other opportunities for engineers in pharmaceuticals, in manufacturing especially, supply chain, and you will see chemical engineers especially, but not exclusively, running sites in key positions in supply chain management. So again, don't limit yourself to just being an engineer in engineering if you're working in a non-engineering company. It depends how ambitious you are or how wedded you are to engineering. Set your own work-life balance rules, because they're very personal to you, and that's what I did. So I always tried not to work at weekends, but I would travel at weekends if it was on company business, and that sort of worked for me. And I was pretty flexible with the evenings and would work as necessary. And you just have to have that balance. It's to suit you. And have a sponsor. Or two if you can. People in the company higher up that will actually champion you at talent reviews and push you forward for opportunities, give you advice, mentoring. So that might be your line manager or your line director. It might be people working in the supply chain that you're supporting. But definitely you'll need to identify people who see what you can do and will champion you, especially in a big organization. It's very easy to get lost. So I think all those points that I've mentioned applied to me, 40 years ago, I think applied today, for the sort of companies that we work for. I think the thing that is different from 40 years ago is that you need to be your authentic self. And I wasn't my authentic self. And I think today that's not the right thing to do, because you have to be, it's a leadership thing for me. If you can't really come to terms with who you are, then I think it's sort of almost would put doubt on your judgment. And leadership is about being open with people and honest and sort of. So I think when you're hiding things and there are boundaries and people know that you can't sort of go there, it affects that relationship. So I think it's a sort of truthfulness to yourself, really. And I think the difference was people like myself would hide my sexuality 40 years ago, maybe in general life as well as at work, but certainly that's how I felt I did it. And I don't think I was the only one. Whereas I think today, if you did that, certainly in the UK or other Western countries where, it's fairly well accepted in society, it would sort of not be the right thing to do. So I think it's now an asset, and all companies are striving to increase the diversity of their workforce. And so I think really that is the difference. And I sort of regretted not having done that. I mean, regret's probably a bit of a strong word, because you can't look back, otherwise you just wouldn't go forward, would you? So I think, could I have been a better leader? Probably, if I had been open about my sexuality, about if I was my authentic self. All that baggage, all that energy in hiding all of that was a waste of energy, and probably made me seem quite ridiculous at the end when I did come out. But again, you have to get over that. So I'll end up really with I overcompensated in the last 2 or 3 years of my working life with GSK, and I became an active member of the Spectrum Group, which is the GSK employee resource group for LGBTQ+ people. And I worked with Jay, that's how I know Jay. And I set up branches, especially the manufacturing facilities, which were sort of lagging behind. I think sort of maybe less open in Spain and Italy and Canada, and we set up branches or chapters of Spectrum Group. And I also sort of hook, line and sinker came out as an HIV positive gay man as well. And right at the end, I gave a lot of motivational talks in our factories that produced antiretroviral treatment. So GSK is one of the major producers of the drugs that we use to control HIV. And it just fitted very well with someone at a senior level talking to employees and motivating them to manufacture the products, and brought it all to life. So yeah, there we are. So there we moved from the closet to being an intranet star really in the company. So I think I was badged as Martin, the engineer first off, the patient, and then the advocate. So, and I think that, that was important. I was an engineer first, and a gay man second. So I think that's all I'm going to say, and let Shrouk have her time on air. And I think we're picking up questions later on, aren't we, John?
Yep, that's correct. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat and we can pick them up at the end. Thank you very much, Martin. That was very, very powerful. That was really great to hear. So now I'm going to pass over to Shrouk. Shrouk, I'm going to spotlight you now. So bear with just a second. And there we go.
Martin, thank you so much for sharing this. It's not often that I share a platform with somebody of your experience, but also your history living through that time and being able to share that with us today. It's incredible. Thank you. So I will share my talk. Am I able to share my screen, or is that button disabled for me?
You should be able to now.
Okay,
Apologies.
let's check. Yeah, I can now. Great. Amazing. Lovely. So thank you very much for having me, both Proud Alliance and InterEngineering. I'm assuming everybody can see my screen. If you don't, just give me a shout. Feel free to unmute your mics. I love seeing your faces, so please feel free to also be on camera. It's so nice to be in a room like this one. So I know we're all on Zoom meetings the whole day, team meetings the whole day, so I wanted to start with something quite interactive. So I'd like you all to grab a pen and paper, and I'll give you 10 seconds to grab a pen and paper. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great. Okay, so we're going to have to be super quick. We're going to have to wake up because we're going to have 10 seconds to complete each exercise going up. So I'd like you to draw lines on your paper like that. And in the first corner, I want you to draw me a nurse in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and give your nurse a name in 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Next. Please draw me a firefighter in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and give your firefighter a name in 3, 2, 1, and we are going right on to the next one, which is harder. Please draw me a rocket scientist in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and give your rocket scientist a name in 3, 2, 1, and finally, please draw me an engineer in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and give your engineer a name in 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Pencils down, papers down, no cheating. Okay, we're going to visit that in a second. But first, I'd like you to have a look at this picture and just tell me how many triangles can you see? Unmute your mics, shout it at me.
I'll go first.
Yeah.
Like 2. Oh, no, sorry. Oh, that's completely wrong. Don't worry. Yeah.
2 triangles?
Don't worry.
6.
6 triangles. I'm going to have one more answer.
5.
5. Okay. So I actually see 2, but how many triangles are really there? The answer is 0. There are no triangles in this picture. Our brains are incredible. They're filling in the gaps for us so quickly all the time that we barely even notice. And that's why I wanted you to do that exercise before as well in 10 seconds. First, I'd like to introduce you to some of my personal friends. So this is my friend, John Cook, and he is a nurse. This is my friend, Melissa Pinder, and she is a firefighter. This is my friend, Bianca Cefalo, and she is a rocket scientist. And hello, lovely to meet you. My name is Shruok El-Attar. I am an electronics engineer working in the medical class 2 femtech field. My pronouns are she or they. I normally ask people to choose, But when I speak about it in engineering, I think she is an engineer is such a powerful statement. And it shouldn't be, but unfortunately we live in a world where it is. So if you are speaking about me specifically in engineering, I'd love for you to use she pronouns. So like I was gloriously introduced, thank you for the amazing intro. I was named BBC 100 Most Influential Women, United Nations Refugee Agency, and top 6 young women engineers in this country. And it's really important for me to talk about this because growing up, I didn't think people like me can have these awards. I didn't see anybody who looked like me with these awards. So it's important for me to be that visible about them. But how did I get here? I am now the lead senior electronics engineer at a femtech startup called M Technology. And I am on a mission to create an electronics engineering department full of talented, creative, imaginative, diverse electronics engineers, and I can't wait. So as I go along with this talk, there is something very strange happening. Please stay focused, and I will ask you in a few minutes if you've noticed the strange thing, okay? Challenge accepted? Yes, Shrouk. Yes. So I was born and raised in Egypt. And when I was in year 3, I was taught by my teacher at school that there is a term called homosexual. And these people were evil people. They belonged in hell. And before that lesson, before that talk from my teacher, I didn't know it had a name to it. I thought, okay, everybody's attracted to women and men and non-binary people, right? Right? And then it dawned on me, I was one of these people my teacher was talking about. I was evil. I belonged in hell. I tried to not think about it for as long as possible. And one of my other really early memories from that time is I used to think that people on my TV were actually tiny little people living inside it. And for me, when I realized that it was electronics made by people like me, I was like, wow, what's this magic? That's magical. I want to grow up and be able to create that magic myself. Took everything apart, including my mum's mobile phone, which didn't make her very happy. My mum looks nothing like that, by the way. So I studied really, really, really hard, and I skipped a couple of years. So I was excited to be able to go to university, not just studying a male-dominated subject, but being one of the youngest to ever qualify. I finished my A-levels at 15. I was going to go and study at 16. That didn't quite go to plan. Before I go on, anything strange? Has anybody noticed anything strange? Unmute yourselves. We're not having typing anymore.
I mean, for me, so far, your whole life just seems rather extraordinary to me already. So that's what I process.
Thank you.
Going to university 2 years before everybody else would be strange, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And to go with the rule of threes, I'm going to take one more answer. Nothing strange is also an acceptable answer. Okay, I'm going to go back, and I want you to really have a look. Nobody I chose to represent me in this PowerPoint looks anything like me. I've been doing a version of this talk for about 10 years now. And for the first 2 years, I was completely oblivious that none of these people were even my ethnicity. And I went on Google to try and find people who look like me after I figured it out. And I realized that just whiteness is such a default that even us as brown people, as ethnic minorities / global majority, we barely even notice it. It's the default. white people make up less than 10% of the world's population, but are highly represented in our fields in electronics, in technology, from racial discrimination in AI to using the hand sanitizers or automatic soap dispensers that that don't work very well on people with darker skin. But also technology is created for good, like Grindr, for example, being used by my government, by the Egyptian government, to crack down on LGBT plus people in Egypt. And my own field of medical femtech. Now, I don't have an idea for an alternative yet. Please do let me know if you have an idea for an alternative, but femtech, not just the name, but everything from marketing, femtech really, really leaves my transgender and non-binary friends out of the conversation. So in 2007, I arrived to the UK, and then I went to Cathays High School, and I studied my A-levels. And then I was really excited to go to university. By the way, I'm the person with straight green hair. I used to straighten my hair all the time. I don't know if there's any other people with natural hair on the call who felt like they had to straighten their hair to be taken seriously or to be accepted or to be professional. And then I found out that I couldn't go to university, not because I was incapable, not because I didn't have the right A-levels, but because I was an asylum seeker, because I arrived to this country as a refugee child. The years that followed that were very difficult, were of the British system being not what I expected at all. For example, I'm not going to read this because I think it's disgusting, but I'd have to prove everything to the government, from my sexuality to anything that had to do with me. And these are the kinds of questions they ask queer people to prove their sexualities. And I arrived here when I was 15. When I was being asked these questions by a judge, I was barely 18 in a courtroom. I was also advised to dress differently in preparation for my deportation, to dress in a way that's more accepted by a Muslim country, according to them. And before that, I didn't realize that the Home Office gave fashion advice. I think they'd make a great Vogue column. And other things included a doctor giving evidence in court about my vagina. So that's the treatment of queer people in this country. The ironic thing is the laws that my LGBT friends in Egypt are still being imprisoned under today are British colonial laws. So we've exported homophobia, and we're now seen as this beacon of LGBT plus rights. So I'd really love us as queer engineers and queer people in STEM to examine our understanding of our own society. In 2012, something terrible happened. My family were deported in a dawn raid, and I was left behind alone. And then a year later, something amazing happened. I was given the right to stay in the UK. My mental health at the time, as you can imagine, was not good. It was not the mental health to go and study at university. But I wasn't going to let this go to waste. And the first thing I did was apply to study engineering at Cardiff University. So I did electronics engineering, and I tried to do as many engineering placements as possible, starting with working with surgeons operating on the eye. I created a machine that helps with eye surgery, all the way to working at Intel, connecting everything to the internet from wine to plants. And I then went to Japan to work for Fujitsu on optical network communications. And it was really great. I was offered a permanent role, but I decided to come back to the UK instead to build a car and race it. I then decided, you know what, I'm going to do a master's. So I did a master's in electron spin resonance. I know a lot of us are in the medical field here, so I'm assuming there's a lot of people who understand electron spin resonance. Would anybody like to explain ESR? Say no. So for people who don't have a medical background, I normally compare it to MRI, and I'm sure a lot of you already know what it means. But it's a machine that can detect things like certain cancers, for example. It fits a whole room. It costs hundreds of thousands of pounds, and what I created for my master's was something that fits a square meter instead and costs less than £300 to make. Imagining a world where people can check for things like cancer through something as their mobile phone is incredible. I hope that my research goes towards creating that future. I then worked at Renishaw with the industry creating industrial robotics that can measure up to a single nanometer. And then I found my place, which is Femtech, for the lack of a better word. I worked at LV as an electronics engineer, and I created technologies like breast pumps that belong in the 21st century and aren't just what we give to dairy cows. So they're things that you can put in a bra, they're silent, you can go to your meeting. But it took 160 years to realize that people who breastfeed don't want to be treated like dairy cows. Why is that? And I loved that experience, but I wanted to go and shape something from the start. So again, staying in the medical femtech field, I've now joined M Technology, working in the menstrual health market, full of over 2 billion menstruators around the world. We're always looking for investors, by the way. If you are interested, please do get in touch. But I can't say more about the product without an NDA. But that does bring me back to the word femtech. And for example, I use terms like people who breastfeed, but most people in that industry would say women. I use terms like menstruators, but most people in that industry, again, would say women. So it's being conscious of that. Now, when COVID pandemic hit, it was awful. It was the worst thing for a lot of people. I was very glad to be an engineer at that time, working in the medical field, because it allowed me to help in a way where other people can't. So I joined a team of volunteer engineers and created a completely open source emergency ventilator that anybody can build. The files are available online. Please check it out. It's called OpenVent. And during COVID as well, my my meeting people wasn't an option anymore. So I started a podcast called Badass Engineers. And I interviewed people from a drag queen scientist to a Canadian Space Agency robotics flight controller to a quantum physicist ballerina, and really show that diversity of engineers, and reached over 100K content views. And since I loved doing that content creation, I started getting sponsored for more content. And right now I'm doing a content called Shrookitronics, the Shrooky Show about electronics, which talks about electronic engineering in a more accessible way as well. And just to improve access to engineering, because I wasn't allowed access to engineering for as long as my asylum claim was going on for, which took 6 years. For some people, they're born into the status and can never go to university. And for some people, it also takes 3 months. It's literally a lottery in this country. So I started a campaign called Equal Access Campaign. I went and spoke in Parliament. I spoke to vice chancellors, and today I'm so excited to share with you that there are over 80 universities in the UK who accept asylum seekers to study. Some of them are engineers, and I'm really proud of that. And y'all, I'm an engineer by day. I'm also a belly dancer by night. But growing up, I was constantly told that I have to choose art or engineering. And these people, I say, embrace the power of and. Last year I started working on a belly dancing robot, but I want to be able to teach it, so I started using things that are lying around the house. So toilet paper, lollipop stick, dog collars, exercise balls, really using what's around us to explain, to improve access to engineering. And this is my first prototype, me dancing with Dave. I named him Dave because we can talk about it later, but I think there's a lot of new belly dancers or Egyptian dancers who aren't Egyptian. But this is the first prototype, and it's very, very customizable. So you can build it to look however you want. I do drag and belly dancing, so that's why Dave is gender non-specific. And everything I make, from performing, from speaking, there is a percentage that goes to my charity, Shruok El-Attar Trust, which helps LGBT plus people in Egypt with mental health support, with safer shelters. And I really do believe that statement. Being an engineer is my superpower. But if I am being honest with you, I would be a liar if I say it's been easy, if I say I've enjoyed every minute of it. I almost quit engineering entirely, not once, multiple times, because of sexism, because of homophobia, because it's difficult for people like us to exist in this industry without being the diversity person. So we're being asked to do all of these diversity work on top of our original job, either unpaid or during our working hours, which means we have less time for our actual job, so we miss out on career progression. And it's not been easy. And I don't think that knowing, like, that quitting is for losers. I think knowing when to quit is a great, great, great skill. But that wasn't it for me. And I'm really glad I didn't, because had I done so at the time, I wouldn't be able to stand here in front of you today and speak to you about all of these cool things. But from that, I learned 3 things. And it's to take up space, be loud, and I will not apologize for my sexuality. I will not apologize for my hair. I will not apologize for wearing a crop top to work and heading an engineering department, because the face of STEM is changing, and it's up for us to retain that changing face. Thank you for having me. I am Shrouk El-Attar.
Thank you, Shrouk. That was really, really inspirational. If everyone wants to sort of come off camera and mic, and we'll sort of have open questions. Does anyone have a question to start us off with? So I might start then. So Martin, I've got my first question for you is, you said you worked a lot with sort of manufacturing sort of spaces. What would you say is important to get sort of the shop floor manufacturing sort of parts of our engineering community involved in sort of LGBT inclusion?
Well, I was sort of reflecting, back to my GSK days and the Spectrum group, and I can't quite remember any of the engineers being part of Spectrum, and I think my sort of feeling was the people that tended to join and set up the groups were in other disciplines, and I still think, therefore, in engineering, especially on a manufacturing site, and many of those manufacturing sites are not in the middle of cities or metropolitan areas. They're in sort of quite small towns and rural areas. So I think there's still, even today, maybe it's seen as a more macho world. Although there's more and more female engineers, and that seems to be a growing sort of part of the engineering population, and there's a big focus by big companies to get the gender balance right. So there's a lot of effort put into recruiting women engineers, for instance, and sort of trying to promote them through to more senior levels. Whereas I think the LGBT thing, it did seem, I don't know, people were less willing to come forward, to be honest. So I don't know why that is. Obviously, the people on this call are not in that position, but I don't know, maybe it's just a more male-dominated world, and you know, especially on the manufacturing sites, and you know, so that's what I noticed.
No, thank you.
Sorry,
sorry, Chris.
So I was just going to build on that, Martin, because you know, having been somebody that's worked on manufacturing sites and come out when I was 30, whilst at, you know, GSK, I think there is a bit around, you know, the psychological barrier of coming out, but also the organizational barrier of coming out. And I think having role model leaders, or the absence of role model leaders, really adds to that psychological barrier around coming out in an organization. And I think one of the things that our ERGs have done really well is to engage that senior leadership, get the allies visible and vocal within the organization, and then highlight, you know, our shining stars like Martin, you know, when we have those in the organization, to say you can have a career, you know, in an engineering or in a STEM science and still be LGBT and progress through the organization. And I think that's really the change I've seen, and that's been driven by the ERGs. It's not, you know, it's been driven by our internal organization wanting to make that change from the employees, not necessarily from a top-down leadership approach. We do have our real strong, you know, CEOs and LTs now that are leading those, but it took the ERGs to make that move in the first place.
Just an interesting little story. When I joined the GSK Spectrum ERG, I'd been on it for 6 months or whatever, and one of the other members on the committee sort of, I don't know how we got into the conversation. It's because I went to somewhere or a bar or something, we were just chatting, and he didn't realize, he thought because of my seniority, I was an ally. I don't know how I got away with that. But anyway, so it was just odd that another gay man in an ERG assumed that I joined because of my seniority, and whether it was I was just an ally, and I had to disappoint him. But anyway, so that's just a little story to illustrate what you're saying there, Chris.
No, thank you. Great comments. I see, Jay, you've got your hand up.
I do, and this question is actually for Shrouk. I was struck by the statement that you made that you've almost, it was difficult and you almost quit. And I think that's a hallmark of a lot of stories that I hear, particularly in the queer community, of people that are successful. And what I always like to ask people is like, what is it that sustained you, got you to the other side to say, yes, I'm going to stay? And what do you do today? What are your practices to support yourself?
I think, so let me start with sort of the straws that broke the camel's back first. So the first time was, I was very, very, very early on in my career. So I would have possibly even been still a student or maybe a graduate. And I had a terrible manager who made me feel like whatever I could do, it could never be right. I was a terrible electronics engineer. And what kept me through that one, so I did sort of quit in a way. I quit that team, which was great. I do not stay in that sort of toxic environment. I did go to HR about it. I've learned, unfortunately, this might be terrible advice, but unfortunately I've learned not to do that ever again when you're this low level against somebody really senior in an organization, it takes a huge mental toll on you. And what made me stay in engineering was that I had a different manager who really believed in me. He was also a white man, and he loved the work that I did for him. Like I did exactly the same thing, but I had much better reception for it. And then it turns out, just before I quit that entire company, there was somebody else who went and reported the same manager after I reported that manager. And he was a white man, and he got believed instantly in like 10 minutes. What took me to try and prove in 6 months took him 10 minutes. And the other time was I was working for a company that I loved, really believed in the values, and I wasn't getting paid very well, but I knew that they didn't have a lot of funding. I was okay with it. I was doing, I was saving the world. I was like, woo. And I then realized that they were paying a male, white, straight guy, who at the time, I'm not joking, had graduated less than a year ago, like 9 months ago. They were paying him slightly more than me. And, we're not supposed to discuss pay. And that's, I think, pay transparency is one of these things that lets companies get away with these treatment. But that was my other, straw. And what kept me going was I found a different place that I also believed in, but I told myself I will not let them pay me under industry standard for somebody of my experience. And that's what kept me going that time.
That's hugely powerful. I think, especially as LGBTQ plus people, we probably feel more in that position to accept what we can get. So the way that you thought about that now is inspirational, and I'll take some learnings from that as well. Maybe my next pay review.
Yeah. Shrouk El-Attar telling us to quit our jobs. That's not what I'm saying.
No, thank you. That's wonderful. We did have a question earlier in the chat from Steffi. Steffi, did you want to give your question to Martin at all?
Yeah, can do. Yeah. It's just I was just curious about was there any special events in your career which made you suddenly come out very late in your career prior to retirement?
Yeah, I'm trying to. I think bizarrely, it was coming out about being HIV positive, because I was going through a sort of stage of life when I was having issues at work, and obviously by this time I was, VP level and traveling all over the world, and things were not going well at home, and so really I just came out to my my manager, who was SVP of manufacturing at the time, and it was just you never plan these things, but it was late one evening. He was working in the office, and I wasn't performing very well, and we were not hitting it off really, and it just I just had enough of it, and it just came out in a sort of flood. And then it took 2 or 3 years as I gradually got more confidence to then come out to maybe the leadership team that I was part of. And I think that's quite a common way, sort of, and then the sort of gay bit just came with it, really. It was just, I think people then just assumed I was gay, if you see what I mean. And I think it's a funny way round, but it was something else that drove me just to then I had to be myself, which meant part of that was being a gay man, that maybe so that I think that's the way round, actually. Yeah, I think that's how it happened, rather than that's the event, I think, that made me change my mind, and it took 2 or 3 years to sort of build up confidence. And then maybe the end, when I knew I was retiring in a year and a half's time, you heard sort of disreputable pensioners or whatever. But I don't know, there was something where your mindset changed about, well, you haven't really anything to lose, really. You know, you just sort of, you're in a different position. And then you sort of realize that you could probably have done that many, many years earlier and been happier and all the rest of it. But it was a combination of those things, I think.
Wonderful, thank you. Are there any more questions before we close today? I do have one little poll that I want to launch as well. It only take like 2 minutes or so. But are there any final questions? Chris, I can see you digitally typing. Is there anything you want to? No. Cool. All right. Well, if there's none, then I'm going to launch this poll. I've never done this before, so please forgive me. So you should have it pop up hopefully in the chat. And there we go. So the question we've got there is, what's your sort of key takeaway from today? What would you take back to your organization? So has that popped up for everyone? Oh, there we go. Cool. I can see them coming in. Wonderful. Authentic's coming out quite strongly. I love these, so this is why we probably should have like a slightly larger audience to do it properly, but it's quite wonderful. The word authentic, I think, is definitely it feels like the right word from today's discussion. Wow. Thank you very much. So I would like to thank you all for coming today. It has been wonderful, 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 and it has been great to hear from our speakers and taking time out of their busy schedules to be here with us all. So maybe we can all like give a bit of a clap or something like that, but you know, it's up to you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you very much. And please check out our websites from PSA, Shrook's website. Martin, I think, maybe has a website. I'm not sure. But please all get in contact and have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all.